All right, next verse. All objects, whether perceived as external or internal, arise in unconditioned awareness. All objects are pointers to awareness. We talked about this, which is revealed when the mind's fascination with objects is relinquished. We're fascinated with what we perceive. And your average person's entire life is run around to satisfy their senses, if you really think about it. An enlightened person knows that everything they're sensing is actually pointers, or can be used, instead of satisfying them, can be used as pointers to the awareness, proof of existence and awareness itself. True nature is the next verse. True nature is unconditioned, unchanging, and unlimited by space, time, name, or form. Now, again, this is an old text, so space and time are listed separately. We know better now that space-time is one thing, so let's change it to unlimited by space, time, name, or form. Uninterrupted inquiry upon awareness, in which every object arises, reveals the unconditioned, unchanging, and unlimited nature of awareness. All right, so he's just saying technique, focus on awareness itself, and eventually you'll see the unchanging, unlimited nature of it. You'll experience it for yourself instead of just taking our word for it. The mind remains undistracted by arising objects when the unconditioned, unchanging, and unlimited nature of awareness is recognized. Then one awakens to the pure being, bliss, and equanimity of awareness. This is kind of where that bliss portion comes in, and it's nothing you can explain. It's just something you have to experience. You can philosophically talk about pure existence, how everything really is just existence itself. You can talk about that. You can talk about how everything really is just awareness itself, but the bliss component is not. It just, there's no philosophical proof that I've come across that actually makes a lot of sense. The Taittiriya Upanishad does a great job when it starts talking about the 5 sheaths of reality, and it gets to the Anandamaya Kosha, but it's not a philosophical proof, right? It only makes sense after the fact. You had to have experienced this this quote unquote bliss, and by bliss, it's not like a super. It doesn't feel like any joy that you've experienced with real stuff, like, hey, I ate this ice cream and this ice cream tastes great, I'm not happy. Hey, this girl I like or this guy I like told me that they love me, right? It doesn't feel like that. Actually, those real world, I'm calling it the real world as we've just proven it's not real, material world, or this objectified, projected world, there's nothing in it that actually equates. A lot of people say, oh, the joy from seeing my firstborn child and all of those things, those are amazing, but they're a drop in the bucket. I mean, they're pitiful, let's face it, in comparison to what he's referring to as bliss here. Just pitiful. That whole, you've achieved, you got the promotion, you won the lottery, and you had a son all in the same day. I assure you, as happy as you would be at that moment, it is a pitiful level compared to what he's referring to as bliss. Bliss isn't even in the right word. It's a euphoria, but it's you can't explain it. You can't explain it. It's just something you've got to experience. All right, so when absorption in awareness is steady and uninterrupted for a long time, establishment, a long time, so a long samadhi experience, establishment in non-separate awareness is close at hand. So what he's saying is, you've got to be in this pseudo high state for a long time. What happens is initially is we get these experiences, and then we eventually come down, and our suspension of disbelief kicks in again, and we start playing this character in this reality that we've created once again. And then we go back to the stuff, and it comes back again. I've even unsuccessfully chased it like a drug addict when I've come down from a samadhi experience on what can I do to get it back. Oh my gosh. And it doesn't work that way either. But when you've been able to be absorbed in knowing the difference between the real and the unreal, and all there is awareness for a long enough time, at that point, he's saying establishment of non-separate awareness is close at hand. Inquire through the 6 stages of absorption, again, samadhi, which gives rise to awakening to the truth of non-separate awareness. So after you've been in this state for a long time, is when you realize that what we're now calling real versus unreal, this projected reality that we're saying is not real compared to the reality of what is awareness, eventually you will come to the conclusion and realize that they're not 2 separate things. They're one and the same thing. Okay, next verse. I actually can't go on that any further in words. I know some people are beating their heads against the wall trying to figure out what exactly I just said there. But don't try to wrap your head around it. That would be a mistake. Again, that's using your mind to grasp something that has actually to do with an awareness outside of your mind. Okay, next verse. All external and internal objects are changing. We know this. World, body, senses, and mind. All changing objects appear and disappear in unchanging awareness. We know this already. He's repeating himself. When the understanding of essential nature is unchanging, as unchanging awareness arises, identification with changing object ceases. Through meditative inquiry, all objects are realized to be expressions of, and therefore not separate from, the unchanging awareness. Constant abiding in this realization of the truth of oneness reveals that everything is only an expression of unchanging awareness. So, a very light example is what we were talking about, how when we say this tablet doesn't exist, existence has taken form of this tablet. There actually is nothing but existence. So, inclusive, we'll come to the realization that it's not like there's this trickery called Maya and the powers of your mind that are creating a fake reality out of over on top of what is really nothing more than existence itself or awareness itself. You'll see that it's all one and the same thing, and it can be no other way. Next verse. Constant abiding as awareness dissolves all misperceptions. Then the heart opens, all doubts are resolved, suffering ceases, and there is liberation from the notion of being a separate self. Next verse. These verses are getting self-explanatory. You may not believe what they're saying at this point, which is why I'm not really expounding on them. If you've gone along with what we're saying and you've actually experienced what each verse is alluding to, it's starting to get a little self-explanatory. Next verse. What is the nature of the separate self? When awareness is realized to be all that there is, that awareness is ultimate reality. The separate self is realized to be only a mental concept. We've talked about this. The individual sense of self only appears to be separate and limited because of the way the mind categorizes and conceptualizes perceptions. We've talked about that as well. This misperception of the I self as a separate and limited individual occurs both in the waking and the dream states. We've talked about that as well. Next verse. The belief of separation, which engenders the notion of confusion, imperfection, limitation, is based on the mental misperception of the mind. He calls it mental misperception, but let's face it, it's a pretty awesome power of the mind to be able to project a reality and then convince itself that it's not projecting that reality. He calls it a misperception. I call it a power. It's pretty amazing, which takes itself to be a separate self. But awareness is ever free of such a division. It is always whole and undivided, being devoid of parts or separation. Ultimate reality is omnipresent, unlimited, complete, timeless, and all-pervasive under all circumstances and at all times. All circumstances and at all times is a little misleading because both circumstances and space-time, as we've seen, are all concepts. It has no meaning in this ultimate reality, this awareness itself. To say awareness, to ask the question when or where is awareness is like asking if the number 9 is happy, right? Those concepts just don't exist. It just doesn't pertain. All right, we are in the home stretch of Drigdrishya Viveka. So he repeats himself a lot in this, so there is actually no need to summarize because there's a lot of repetition in here. Which also makes it great. It's great efficient. It's a very short read and very effective. It's great. So let's dive back into it. The notion of separation and limitation are merely thoughts produced by the mind that arise in awareness. The notion of being a separate, limited, and finite self arises as a mental emotional perception because of the mind's projection of and identification with the felt sense of limitation. When the projections of the mind are traced back to their origin, the notion of separation is healed, misperception ceases, and separation dissolves as the unreal notion that it is. Okay, that's almost a summary of everything we've talked about so far. So let's go on to the next verse. Awareness is whole and without parts. Statements such as "Thou art that." I'm gonna update the dictionary. So statements such as "You are that," "That you are," and "I am pure awareness." This self is pure awareness. Pure awareness is what everything is. Pure awareness is unknowable, and I am that unknowable. Reflect the truth of non-dual awareness. The notion of being separate, finite, and limited is not found in either the descriptions or realization of essential nature. So what he's saying here is all of our perceived problems come from the sense that we wrongly believe that we are a limited being that's finite and separate from everything we're perceiving. This is the whole crux of the whole study here. And when you investigate it, we find it not to be true. And once we find that those statements that he just went through are true, you are that which you're looking for. The self is pure awareness. You are really just existence and awareness and nothing else. That notion of being separate and finite and limited it dissolves. And by definition, once you notice you're not limited, obviously the notion that you're limited dissolves. Next verse. The illusion of separation, and it is an illusion, which is brought about by the two aspects of projection and concealment. Projection and concealment are what we talked about earlier. Your mind's power to create a story out of nothing, projection, and concealment, it means suspension of disbelief, where concealment of the fact that you've created this reality that you believe to be real. This belief that you believe to be real is concealment itself. Suspension of disbelief. So these two aspects he's talking about, when he talks about projection and concealment, he's talking about the power of you to create stories out of nothing and then forget that you've created stories out of nothing and believe them to be real. These two powers arise within and are not separate from awareness. The experience of separation appears to divide and limit the indivisible and unlimited nature of awareness and makes it appear as the world of separate objects and embodied separate I selves. Again, he's repeating himself here. This is exactly what we're talking about, that the act of experiencing, the act of seeing itself naturally creates a notion that something is seen and something is seeing it. So the act of seeing itself creates this seer and the seen relationship. That they're everything's separate objects. Next verse. The mind fallaciously appears to perform various actions as well as enjoys their results in the erroneous form of a separate individual. He's starting to get into the realm of disproving free will here. I know it's a hotly debated topic whether we have free will or not. I am going to I'm going to jump ahead and actually solve that topic very easily. Upon investigation, when you really look at it, the notion of volition, if there's a concept of you and that you make these decisions upon how you interact with the external world, and you cause things to happen to yourself and cause an effect and karma and all that stuff is actually, when you investigate it, all of it is found to be total nonsense. It's all part of the story that you've created as reality. The mind divides what is not two into a universe of separate objects of enjoyment, which consists of various combinations of the elements. Next verse. The sense of being a separate I self who experiences a separate universe has existed since the beginning of time. It's debatable. Time is a creation of the dividing mind that splits what is timeless into the notion of past, present, and future. Okay, he's debating himself here. The notion of being a separate self who is aware of a separate universe has only empirical existence, meaning a tangible, testable existence, is only conceptual and remains true only until awakening as awareness. So space-time, cause and effect, past, present, and future, all of that only feels true when you don't actually investigate its actual truth. Once there's the awakening of awareness, as he puts it here, then it goes on to the next. Both self and world are not separate from awareness and are cognized to be real only as long as the mind projects, identifies with, and believes in the notion of separation. The story that you're telling yourself as reality. Next verse. As long as the belief in separation exists, the notion of causality exists. Cause and effect we're talking about, including karma. The mind projects the existence of the individual in the waking state and then imagines it afresh in the sleep and dream states. He's going back to that. Next verse. The individual and world that are cognized in the dream state are illusory. They're not real. We can't argue with that. Right? Who you are playing in a dream and everything going on in a dream, even though it feels real, we know that it's all projections of the mind. When dreaming ends, the dream self and all the dream objects are realized to be merely products of the dreaming mind. When you wake up, you're able to say, oh, that was just a dream. You know it wasn't real. Next verse. While the dream self believes that the dream world is real, the waking self believes that the dream world is unreal and the waking world is real. So when you wake up, we all experience this. When you wake up from a dream, everyone goes, that was a dream. It was not real. But this awake world is real. We all feel this way. But both these selves are only passing projections of the mind. So even when you are awake, upon investigation, when you stop and think about it, yourself, even in the waking world, is just a passing projection of the mind. Ephemeral concepts that come and go in awareness, which is the underlying reality, devoid of separate selves. Awareness is the real reality. Next verse. The self believes that the world is real. But this empirical world is unreal. Meaning this tangible, testable, solid world is actually unreal. And he's supporting this by saying, as it disappears during deep sleep. Meaning you don't concern yourself with it during deep sleep. The three worlds of waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep are ephemeral appearances. The real self, awareness, underlies and therefore transcends the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. This is a common Hindu concept that comes up a lot, this waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep. So, you don't actually, your sense of self, your awareness is the only thing that's left during deep sleep. You don't believe that you are this person. You don't care about what you have going on. Even a loving mother forgets her baby exists during deep sleep. This is where the empirical world, a scientist would say, you are not conscious during deep sleep, but you're still aware. You still have activity there. You're still aware that you went into deep sleep. So I heard this example, and this example is great. Imagine a train station, and there's a conductor at the train station. And there are two types of trains that come through this station. There is the commuter train, a passenger train, where everybody loads up and comes and goes for work, and there's a lot of activity. There's a freight train where there aren't a lot of people, but a lot of inanimate objects. Those are the two types of trains. And there's a conductor on this train. Or the conductor on the platform, I should say. So imagine this train station, and there's this conductor or employee standing on the platform. and the commuter train comes by. And it's filled with people in their suits and their briefcases, and they're extremely active, and they all board on this train, and then a bunch of people get off, and it's really active, and it's rush hour, and then the train pulls away, and there's nothing. Then imagine next comes the freight train. And the freight train it's carrying coal or gas or inanimate objects. It's kind of peaceful, but there's still there's an engineer on that train, and there's still a couple guys who work on that train. It pulls in, it stops, they get off, go to the bathroom, get back on the train, and go. Now, in this analogy, if you will, awareness is this employee standing on the platform of the train watching these two trains go by. The active commuter train is the waking state. This not so active, but there's still stuff going on, freight train is the dream state. And in between those trains are nothing. There are no trains in between those trains. The commuter train leaves, there's a bunch of nothing. There is no train. Freight train comes in, then pulls away, and there's nothing. There is no train. This nothing, this concept of no train on the empty tracks is deep sleep. Now, all the while, there is still this employee watching it. He is the awareness. The awareness sees the waking state come and go. The awareness sees the dreams come and go. And the awareness is also aware of the lack of any activity, the deep sleep. So that's hopefully that makes sense after that analogy. That's what he's getting at here in this verse. When awareness is realized to be the underlying reality between all states, waking, dreaming, and even unconscious, the world of objects are realized to be merely reflections of awareness. So this is where it gets pretty confusing, but it's still pretty profound once you understand it. When you reach the point where you realize that things don't exist, existence is taking the form of these things. You are not something that is aware of an object in front of you. There is awareness in general creating the notion of an object in front of you and you as somebody who is aware of that object in front of you. When they say merely reflections of awareness, that's what they mean. You have this awareness, and the reflections of awareness are this concept of a direct object of the awareness and something that is aware of that direct object of the awareness. The underlying reality really is just awareness. So when I'm looking at this tablet, the me, I'm seeing this tablet. There really is just seeing. There's only an act of seeing. Seeing is all that's going on here. The tablet and the me that's seeing is all part of seeing. And they call them reflections because to an ancient Hindu, this feels like when you're looking in a mirror and it reflects back the reality, but the mirror itself is not the real you, right? You can't scratch the mirror and all of a sudden have a scratch on your face, right? It's just a reflection of what's standing in front of it. That's why they like to use the word reflection here. Next two verses together. The qualities of water, such as wetness, fluidity, coldness, sweetness, wave, foam are inherent in water and are not separate from water except as conceptual names and forms. That makes sense when you think of it. So also being, consciousness, peace, and bliss, which are the natural characteristics of awareness, appear to be inherent in the so-called separate selves that reside in the waking and dream states. From the relative standpoint, wetness, foaminess, waves, fluidity, coldness, sweetness appear as separate qualities of water. So too do individual I selves and objects appear to be separate qualities of awareness. So does this make sense? Let's just go with two of them. Wetness and coldness, let's say, appear to be separate qualities of water, but in reality, these are just concepts. It's just water. We have assigned these names and qualities to help describe water. Wetness, it's wet. We say it's wet, it's cold because we're trying to describe water. But really, wetness and coldness are not separate qualities of water. There's just water. It's what we have created to help try to describe water. It's just water. So, in the same way, it's just awareness. We are trying to describe, I am aware. To try to describe awareness, we say, I am aware, and I am aware of something. To describe seeing, in order to describe seeing, I have to say, seeing. There's an eye that sees the tablet. Me, as the seer, and the tablet as the seen are not separate qualities of seeing. There is just seeing. But in order to make sense of seeing, we create the seer and the seen. Make sense? All right. Next verse. 22 verses left. You're almost enlightened. All differences like wetness, foam, wave, which is just a form of water, coldness, fluidity, and sweetness are non-separate characteristics of the underlying essence of water. The characteristics of water have no existence separate from the water from which they arise. I'm going to say that again. The characteristics of water have no existence separate from the water itself from which these characteristics arise. So when you're describing water as wet, wet has no separate inherent you cannot separate wet from the water. You cannot take water and pull out something that is wetness. I mean, I suppose you could say you dehydrate the water, but change the shape. But the character, you know what I'm trying to get at, right? It's just an analogy, right? You can't separate out. You can't. Let's say there's a wave in the water. So you have a body of water, and there's a wave in the water. You can't pull out something called wave that's separate from the water. So a wave and the water aren't two separate things as wave plus water equals water wave. It's just water. Wave is a name we have given to a structure that we see that appears on water. It's not separate from the water itself. So all these characteristics appear and disappear in water. All characteristics of water are only aspects of their essential nature, water. Make sense? Okay. Last verse. You get it now. You're now free. So listen carefully. And feel free to listen to this over and over again until it really sinks in. And don't take my word for it. Feel free to debate it in your head. Because you'll see that it's true. But you really need to experience it yourself. So definitely listen to this over and over. Watch this over and over and over again until you're actually experiencing it. Feel free to debate it and come to your own conclusions. So here's the last verse. Upon waking up from the dream state, all characteristics of the dreamer, such as existence and consciousness, dissolve and are realized to be only projections of the dreaming mind. Okay? No argument there. Just so, upon awakening, and by awakening, he means the realization that there is just awareness. Actual reality is aware. Awareness is the only real thing that you, quote unquote, experience. And you don't really experience it because there is no you to experience it. But anyways, just so, upon awakening, all separate characteristics of the self dissolve and are realized to be only projections of non-dual awareness, and awareness with a capital A, non-dual awareness. As foam and wave have no existence separate from water, so also the entire universe, consisting of the separate self and the objective world around it, have no existence separate from non-dual awareness. In truth, all that exists is non-dual awareness. All right. Feel free to bombard me with questions. That was Drishya Viveka. To me, the most efficient text to take you from a state of a person who suffers to an enlightened existence where there actually is no such thing as suffering.